Good morning and welcome to our program. This is for corporate America and the insurance carriers too, but it's about how to better open up, because we're reopening now and it's critical that we get it right. And I don't think we're that close to getting it right yet. So today's program it's May 8th, 2020. It is 12 o'clock Eastern, I think 9 o'clock Pacific time. There's a Q&A button up in the corner. If you have questions, please list them in. This is about our 8th time to do this, first corporate, but we've never been able to get to all the questions, but we still post them on our website, the answers for them. Added treat today, the doctor and the health safety expert will also respond to questions too on our website to fill those out. Let me introduce briefly, and then I'll bring them back later, our panel today. First is Dr. Clinton Baird, a neurosurgeon.
Well, thank you, Steve.
Good to have you. Dr. Baird actually kind of slid into his chair as we were starting. His surgery this morning took longer than expected, and we appreciate it, Doc. We know this was tough. Also on here is Robert Wallace. Robert is a health and safety environmental expert and is quite knowledgeable. I've had some great discussions with both Dr. Baird and Robert Wallace on these things. So very interesting panel today. You're going to enjoy this, folks. And of course, Alisa Hopkins from our office. Alisa, welcome, Alisa. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Let's go to the Holden Institute to see what's going on in the world. All right. Wow, the Texas governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Texas attorney general all came out guns a-blazing about a salon owner that was arrested for violating the executive order. So that was lifted by the Supreme Court. The problem with that is we've got mixed messages about how this is all going to happen, which doesn't improve things. And we just need to pick a route and get there. We're not there yet. White House reflects the CDC guidelines for reopening over concerns that they reject for concerns that were overly prescriptive. I had to look that up, folks. I didn't think it was a prescription, but it talks about making rule. They didn't want to make solid rules. They wanted them to be more fluid, so to speak. But luckily, I've got some sources out in DC and in New York. I got a bootleg copy of it last night. I have not published it yet because I'm waiting for the news services to publish it because I don't want to be, don't want anyone coming to ask me how I got it. But we'll have it up soon. It's an interesting read. This section, the one I've got up, is really applies to businesses in general. So if you want this, just send me an email and I'll give it to you today. No problem there. I probably won't go up on the website till late tonight or tomorrow, but I'll check on that. Let's see what else. The SBA emergency money is running out. It's been overwhelmed by the demand, slashed its loan limits from 2 million to 150,000, and they're not taking any more applications. Our problem is going to be we put about 600 billion just in small business money toward it. Our problem for our businesses, for our corporations, will be if we go into what I call a double bounce, that we come back through this COVID problem again because we released too soon. There's not going to be a lot of money to pass back around. So the corporations are going to have to get these reopenings just as close to right as they can. Today's job reports were out, and it was sheer, to nobody's surprise, it was sheer disaster. We were now at 20 million jobs disappeared, close to 21 million actually. have disappeared since this started 6-7 weeks ago, almost to a 15% unemployment rate. Only the depression has exceeded the joblessness that is we're at now. And the depression, I don't recall for sure, but I think it took like 16 months to get there. We've done it in a month and a half. So we'll keep an eye on that. Let me end on the AI Chief Executive, Mr. Dupereau, warns, quote, will be the single largest catastrophic loss the industry has ever seen. Mull on that for a second. If the insurance industry is hit that hard, what is going to go on with everybody else? And part of what I'm talking about today is the litigation side of things. Now, my firm has pulled together, well, we've invested over 500 hours researching COVID. We've thrown about 200,000 at it so far, learning, following, keeping things moving. Remember, the word COVID-19 was not even really in our lexicon until late December, January, and it didn't mean anything to us until just recently. COVID is a new animal, it's a dangerous animal, has to be handled properly. To my corporate folks on the line, some of them are already my clients, so you don't need to listen to this, but the rest of you, don't try to go reopening alone. You can't make it. You won't make it. You cannot make your shop so safe that you will not have coroned in the shop. You get coroned in the shop, somebody's probably going to die eventually. And we know plaintiff attorneys and their reptilian minds, when somebody dies, then it's somebody's fault. So you need to get, and there's lots of other good counsel out there. This isn't a pitch for us. We've got our folks and we help out wherever we can, but get somebody that is very COVID knowledgeable, because you also not only need them to do your OSHA, to do your ADA, to do your comp, you need them to marshal the experts that can come in and take care of things. We've got a 24-hour line for COVID that when someone has a problem or an outbreak, we get people out there, and they're not lawyers. It's folks like Robert Wallace is on our panel today. It's folks that go into the workplace. You're going to need people that do cleaning after an event or after a problem. There's just no way you can go it alone. If you need even recommendations, call us. We'll help out for free. We'll give you recommendations, but it's important. I've got just a minute or two, but it's going to get ugly, folks. There's going to be a lot of litigation. There's going to be a lot of reptilian action by the plaintiff attorneys. And remember this, there will not be one CEO on your jury. There won't be one head of HR on your jury. What you're going to have is about 12 people who are the employees who are scared to death of what's happening. And I know after trying 200 jury trials, how jurors think. Jurors want to make sure corporations understand that they as employees need to be protected at all costs. If you ever fall into the trap the reptilian brain goes to for the plaintiff attorney of profits over people, and they always want to make that argument, if you get into profits over people, you're in trouble. You got trouble. So we do our best to avoid getting into trouble, and then our best way to defend it once we're there. All right, enough from me now. Let's talk to the experts, and that's the folks that I've enjoyed just working with. Doctor, would you join us?
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Doctor, it's good to have you. Dr. Baird is a neurosurgeon, and you think, well, what's a neurosurgeon doing about COVID? He loves to study it, and he probably has as many hours in it as we do, and we do partner with him on a lot of these things, and he can talk to you about what he does. He's actually Johns Hopkins trained. He's worked with the FDA as a clinical consultant, and then he has his own telemarketing company that is working on COVID. He's actually already been out in the market many times, setting up plans for testing. But why don't you tell them about opening? Tell them what you did in the background.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome everyone. So we started about 3 years ago with the telemedicine and telehealth program. We worked over this last few years in developing a digital health and remote laboratory program that has positioned us nicely to be able to get out into this marketplace at this time. Unfortunately, it's in this setting of COVID, but we are primarily positioned to be able to deliver healthcare, remote patient monitoring, and laboratory testing in a digital fashion, as has been very conducive when we're with stay-at-home orders and shelter in place as we have been. We have taken that plan and over the last 3.5, 4 months have really focused diligently on working with the FDA and getting some products through to be able to allow testing out in the marketplace with antibody testing and the viral testing, as people have seen come on board over the last months. We've along with that, worked hand in hand with some employers, first locally, and then as we've branched out in a national reach to help employers in risk mitigation and keeping the essential employees at work. And now as we move towards return to work and work reentry, have developed plans to help corporate America bring their employees back to work. I will transition over and share some slides here. So what is your return to entry workforce action plan look like? We've worked with employers on this plan, and this will continue to evolve. Right now, we are moving from pandemic America and the disease containment phase, and we're still in disease containment, make no mistake about that. But we're going to start moving towards disease surveillance. We're going to start moving towards return to work, phase 1, 2, and 3. Certainly, we're going to see changes in those plans along the way. That's why this still continues to be difficult, because it's a moving target. You'll see the CDC make one statement, and then the White House say, no, we can't do that, as Stephen mentioned. So our plan is essentially a three-pronged strategy from a medical perspective, but also very critically important is we have to bring in the legal backing as well as health, safety, environmental expertise. I want to share a brief story. We had a distraught CEO of a large trucking company that had 2 cases of COVID infection in the dispatch center. This was about 6 weeks ago when fears were not yet at their peak, but nearing so. We came in on a Friday evening, interviewed all the employees with physician telemedicine interviews over the weekend, and came out to their job on site, tested everyone on Monday, and developed a strategy to help essentially calm fears and keep employees at work, because they were in the midst of a breakdown, both mentally and emotionally, and employees that didn't want to be at work because they were fearful for their life. So that's the first step is an overall assessment of employee health. What kind of comorbidities do they have? Understanding the workforce density. If you think about these numbers for a moment, if you have 1,000 square feet, you need to calculate how many people can fit in 1,000 square feet of unobstructed workspace. Of course, all our workspaces have obstructions, so those calculations need to be taken into mind with both your employee workforce as well as your customers that come into your workspace. For example, in hospitality and industry, we need to be sure not to allow those to be over densely populated at any one point in time. We need to have a thorough understanding of our high touch and high traffic areas. And then cleaning. Don't get caught with your pants down cleaning without an EPA approved disinfectant. Part of this is protecting our people, part of this is protecting our companies. We need to document all along the way what we're doing and what kind of strategies and implementation we've taken to protect our workforce. And the proper disinfectant is the most basic measures one can take, along with the proper personal protective equipment. We need to understand our ability to have proper personal protective equipment and actually use it. Take, for example, someone who has COPD. They have a hard time breathing as it is, and if you put them in a N95 respirator for 8 hours, both their comfort and their work productivity are going to drop dramatically. That is the type of worker that you'll want to stratify their risk and understand if you can deploy them in a way that will allow them to be more socially distanced and perhaps not need to wear a personal protective equipment like a respirator, potentially by working from home. And then employee education is critical. In healthcare, we do this all the time, and we still can find each other slipping up. We point it out quickly and make corrections. Quick story, in the local grocer a couple days ago, identified a well-minded employee coming out from behind the counter. He had his gloves on still, comes out into the common customer work area. And from there, he is holding his phone. He moves his phone from his right hand to his left hand, wipes it across his face with his right hand, puts his phone back into his right hand, into his pocket, takes his gloves off very nicely, and is washing his hands. Excellent job. He immediately grabs his phone again, which is now contaminated with the wiping of across the face. And he essentially was trying to do his best, but within less than 3 seconds, he is back to a contaminated state. And the next surface that he touches is going to have the germs and the potential COVID-19 that was wiped across his face right back on the next surface he touches. We also see this in our own health policymakers. This is an example of a health policymaker actually giving a talk about COVID disease containment, and that is just a poor form, and we want to avoid having our hands anywhere close to our faces. I want to have us understand a little bit about disease prevalence in the United States. The numbers are somewhat varied and all over the map, but generally you're going to see a 3 to 12% prevalence of the disease in the United States. And unfortunately, at this time, that's led to about 77,000 deaths. Everyone knows the onset and the incubation period of coronavirus. I won't belabor this, but I'll draw your attention to the underlined section on the bottom of the slide. This shows us that in Italy, they tested a large population of people in this town of Vo, and they identified 43% of the individuals had no symptoms at all. This will become an important measure later. So in our health history questionnaires, how do we deal with these individuals that did not have symptoms? And then why do we care? Why do we care about identifying coronavirus? And this shows this nicely. Look to the right side of your screen, you'll see measles. It has a R0 score, or a spreading value of 18. For every one person infected with measles, 18 additional individuals be infected. That's the worst case scenario we have today. COVID-19 sits at 4, and actually a little bit above 4. In some studies, you'll see a 4.6 number. Measles still is alive today with a value of Contagion that's as high as 18. In 2018, there were 160,000 deaths worldwide. None in America because we have herd immunity, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So we talked about understanding your workforce and assessing risk and understanding where you can mitigate that risk. Another measure to mitigate risk is understanding your workforce immune status, as well as their viral status. As we return to work, any individual in the workforce that is acutely ill will need to have consideration for a viral test, potentially an antibody test depending on the situation. And individuals, as they're coming back into work, it's important to understand their immune status to know if they've previously been infected. And we'll use in the medical world a whole assortment of tools, which you can see here on the left of the screen is a reverse transcriptase PCR machine in the lab. The middle is a complex antibody testing machine called Alisa, and the cassette to the right with the numbers on it shows a reactive antibody, meaning that this individual has both IgG and the acute phase of the immune response, IgM. That's important for understanding the potential that they could be infected. And when we went into the trucking company, we actually saw 5% of the individuals unknowingly had active IgM antibody, meaning that they could very well be in that infection stage still, and they were pulled from the workforce and quarantined. A little bit on herd immunity and why this is important. Herd immunity is what we will get to and what we already got to in the United States with measles. We want to get there with COVID-19. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a lot of time. So take, for example, where we are right now, 3 to 12% is the disease prevalence. So that is the immunized and healthy individuals, the yellow people mixed in with the blue and the red. Where we don't want to move to is shifting all at one time towards the not immunized, sick, and contagious individuals. You'll see these in your workforce. If you look to your left, the red mixed in with the blue, the sick and contagious people are standing right next to the non-immunized but still healthy workforce, which is now going to turn into more sick and contagious workforce and impair our ability to keep our workforce safe and healthy. Where we want to get to is the more yellow individuals, which are immunized and healthy, and then we'll protect our workforce. Another way to look at this is to look at herd immunity. The threshold we need to cross in the United States with our population is around 225 million. Right now, you'll see we are still at the very small purple dot. And this is as late as April 24th from Dr. Dowdy at Hopkins. So now let's come back to this for a moment and why it's important to understand the immune status in your workforce. So we are going to move from this 3 to 12% to 70, 80% as time goes by. There are only 3 ways to do that. You either become infected at work, and therefore you have litigation claims potential, and Steve and his team can work with you in helping to do that. You can also have a worker that is infected in a non-work exposure. And how do you know that? Well, the bottom line answer is you don't. You don't know how they got infected. And that's where understanding their immune status ahead of time and ongoing over time can help you protect your corporations from individual claims that may claim workforce exposure. The bottom one is the way we hope to get to herd immunity is through vaccination. And again, we're going to be a long ways from vaccination, and we're a long ways from understanding what vaccination really means. So it's important to keep this in mind as to why we do antibody testing, is to be able to differentiate between these 2 types of exposures that are critically important in protecting your workforce and your company. Shifting to the third and critically important asset of your strategy for workforce reentry is ongoing health assessments. These are going to include daily health questionnaires, asking both about personal health history, travel, and exposure to hotspots, as well as family health history, asking if anyone in the family has been sick, and understanding how to mitigate that risk. If you have an individual that answers these in a positive way, meaning that they have had these exposures or these illnesses, they need to stay home from work. You need to have a very low threshold for keeping these individuals at social distancing and predominantly at home if they're sick. Daily temperature tracking is important, but also tracking before work. If you know that someone is without a fever on the morning of work, that's good and well, but you also need to know that they're without a fever the day before work. Even without COVID, think about the flu and the common cold. We lose $25 billion a year in work productivity, which pales in comparison right now to COVID, where we're losing $280 billion a month. Hospital systems are losing $1.4 billion a day. So we can get very granular with the tracking in the workplace through software tracking and a host of tools for temperature tracking and for understanding that temperature, the health history questionnaire, combined with the employee's immune status that you can know by ongoing testing. The goal is to track these temperatures into sections of organizations and get very granular so that we can identify hotspots even within your larger organizations. We've also partnered with a thermal measuring company so we can set up stations like the one you see here pictured, where the gentleman is taking a temperature and showing that you also have a mask on. You can do higher throughput thermal measurements that are manned by an attendant to be able to gauge people's temperature as they walk through, as well as throughout the day to identify someone that may need to be removed from the workplace. So coming back and wrapping this up, why do we do this? Why are we going through all these measures to keep our employees safe and re-enter the workforce? And it goes back to that contagiousness of the coronavirus. COVID-19 is very contagious and it's deadly. People die of this disease. We talk about, oh, people die of the flu with the same regularity, and people do die of the flu, don't get me wrong. but people die of the flu from secondary complications to being hospitalized and other things from the flu. In COVID-19, 20% of the individuals in the ICU are between the ages of 20 and 54. That's a large number of our healthy workforce, and those people are hospitalized and dying. So we need to be sure to take these measures to protect our workforce, first and foremost, to protect the people and to make them safe, and to give them the appearance of being safe. There is a lot of fear and anxiety in returning to the workforce. We see that day to day. In my particular line of work, we're healthcare workers, and we see people breaking down, crying, literally grown men, grown women in tears on a regular daily basis because of the fear of bringing this home to their families and their loved ones. You're not going to maintain a productive workforce in that kind of environment. We need to do our best to take these measures to be able to risk mitigate. This comes down to a lot about risk. Ultimately, we want to develop a contagion risk score and give you data. So the data you'll have from this kind of assessment is that you've had a medical professional assess the overall employee health or comorbidities and do risk stratification, immune status understanding, and then continued and ongoing health assessments, temperature tracking, and contact tracing to be able to come up with a risk score. The importance of that data is so that when you come up to the need of having, unfortunately, the need to defend yourself in court and need to call on Steve and his team, he'll have something to hang his hat on. If you go to him and don't have any data, he's going to have a lot harder time mounting a defense on your behalf as compared to if you go to him and you've got these data points that you say a medical professional team, whether it be our team or another team, say, we implemented these measures, we pulled these people from the workforce, we let these people segregate to a certain area of work that's more productive and safe for them, and the whole host of implementation that's important for protecting your workforce and also for protecting your business should you come out against the need for defense. That's all I have, and thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Doctor. A quick question. I was going to save questions at the end, but there was one that came across that was really interesting, and if you can answer it in 2 sentences. Is it a realistic possibility that the virus will mutate to a measles type killer where it is just hitting everybody, you know, like in your example?
Yeah. If you look at history, the answer would probably be no. So you have seen some viruses that have taken an R0 score from 4 to 6, or 6 to 7, 8. But to take it from 4 to go to measles, which is at 18, would be more than a 4-fold increase, would be highly unlikely for its contagion. Another fear people have, though, is to take COVID-19 and turn it into Ebola. Say it keeps its same contagious score, but it has a fatality of Ebola, which is, 12, 15 times higher, easy. And that'd be another fear to have. And those things are possible, but to turn into measles would be highly unlikely.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it. Next, I would like to introduce Alisa Hopkins. Lisa and I work together at the firm, and she is an individual who she's an ex-law review editor, and she fits the mold. She likes reading. She likes understanding everything about it. She's also an MBA, so she's very accomplished in it, and she loves this stuff. One of our earlier seminars that was for the insurance industry, the webinar, one of the folks on the out in the public sent us a Q&A. They wrote really a question, says, can CNN please hire this lady as an expert commentator? She knows 99.9% more about this stuff than the experts on that network. I don't know if it's that much, but she does. She knows more about COVID than any lawyer in America. I would say more, but as much as any lawyer in America. And Alisa, take it away and educate the folks.
Thank you, Steve. And it's great to be back for another webcast. Thank you for having me. And welcome, everyone. Look forward to discussing with you briefly about your reentry programs. So let me just bring up here. I have a couple slides to share with you. If I can get it, 1 second. Well, it looks like here that we're having this is live TV, we're having some issues with the screen share. So I will just talk to you briefly about what's going on in terms of what we're seeing with corporate reentries right now. So at this point in time, what we're seeing is there have been several lawsuits filed against employers already. We've seen this for claims for common law negligence. We've seen it for claims for wrongful death of employees. Failure to screen protocols weren't in place. Failure to warn protocols weren't in place. Even class action lawsuits by employees. Two of the main ones that we've seen right now is by Walmart. Walmart has 2 separate lawsuits that have been filed against them on behalf of the estates of employees, and that's for wrongful death. Both of these instances, employees contracted COVID-19, they allege, at the workplace and died as a result. And then also we're seeing a big one right now is Smithfield. In Smithfield, this is a meat packing facility that has different facilities across the country. What we're seeing is outbreaks of COVID-19 among the workplace. And what's a little bit different than Walmart, even though Walmart at the time had implemented some strategies to mitigate the spread of the disease, the employees, argued that wasn't enough that Walmart had done. In Smithfield, the employees argued that it's just been business as usual, that there were no special tactics or mediation tactics put in place, that there was no social distancing. They were told to work as they always had prior to COVID-19, and that resulted in massive outbreaks of the disease within their facilities. I believe one facility, it was over 600 positive cases amongst employees. So they are now facing negligence claims, along with a variety of things at this point. So the 2 main things I'm going to talk to you today about reentry into your workplace, there are 2 things that you want to consider. One is going to be the OSHA guidelines. That's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's guidelines. And then also it's going to be the Center for Disease Prevention and Control guidelines, the CDC. So whenever I say guidelines, it's important to know that both of these agencies they call it guidelines, but what they really are considerations. There is no black and white print guidelines for a business to follow. And why that's so important is it's a fluid situation. It's up in the air. You are exposed to the potential for these claims, even though there is nothing black and white in place. The phrase I have gone back to is, you hear the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a team to reopen your workplace, quite frankly. So it is vitally important that you have both the legal aspect helping you follow guidelines, implementing a specific strategy for your workplace that is dependent on your industry, your work facilities, the diversity in your workplace, coming up with a specific plan for that, as well as the medical aspects, such as what Cura is doing when they're coming into workplaces and implementing specific protocols to follow. It is very vitally important that you have both the legal and the medical aspect to this and the team implementing that for you. It is important to note that CDC, their recommendations, their considerations, they've changed multiple times. In fact, I believe just this last week, from what I saw, it has changed a little bit already. OSHA has been a little bit more solid in their recommendations. The last one that I'm going to go over with you, it was implemented on April 10th of this year, 2020. So what these are, like I said, we'll start with OSHA. These are the 3 main considerations that OSHA gives you to consider for workforce reentry, basically making your plan of action to reenter your workplace. They discuss the where, the how, and the what. Basically meaning, what are the areas, what are the sources of COVID-19 in your workplace? So we'll start with the where. The where is going to be the high traffic areas within your specific workplace. So when I say high traffic areas, that does not necessarily mean the area where the most people at one time congregate together. It is the high traffic areas. What are the areas where the most people go through on a daily basis? Would this be your lobby? Would this be your conference room, your bathrooms, your break room area, Those are considerations you need to take into account. The next is the how. And it would be, how is COVID-19 most likely spread within your specific corporation? You need to think that what we know about the virus thus far is it is spread through physical contact and through bodily fluids. So how is this spread within your workplace? Is it going to be employee to employee? Is that the highest risk? Is it employee to customer? Or is it going to be customer to customer in their workplace? Because it doesn't necessarily mean your employees, but you also need to think into account of your customers, because you do pose liability and the risk for lawsuits against customers as well as your own employees. The next consideration is going to be the what. So what are the workplace sources most likely to have the virus attached to them? So it goes into account, you have to consider these other things. So these are going to be the actual kind of tangible items. So within the areas that we discussed where the high traffic areas are there communal phones? Are there copy machines that people use regularly? What about elevators? For example, the restaurant industry, you're probably going to have higher sources for the disease, relying on them on, food and drink items, because those come into the most contact with the person and their bodily fluids. So these are different things to consider. Next, I'm going to go to the CDC. So the OSHA, that told you considerations for how you can determine what the sources in your workplace the virus are. Now the CDC is going to give you some considerations for once you determine what those sources are under OSHA guidelines, basically how to control the virus from those sources. So the first consideration that CDC gives is they want you to consider how can you reduce the transmission among your employees and customers. These are, like I said, they're going to be very specific to your industry and your specific corporation, but considerations could include, obviously, sick employees that are symptomatic need to stay home. As Dr. Baird discussed, obviously we know that it appears some people who are infected and can be contagious or non-symptomatic. That is why it is so vital that you have a medical team like Cura come in and help you develop a strategy to mitigate that risk as well. You need to identify workers who have been exposed to the virus. This just does not just mean in the workplace, but also outside of the workplace. Do they have a sick relative? Where have they traveled recently? What about in the workplace? Do they travel for work? Are these high traffic areas where the virus is spreading rapidly? These are considerations you need to give. Separating sick employees. Once you know that someone has the virus, has a fever, something that affects, you immediately need to segregate them and you need to send them home. And you also need to inform everyone else that they have potentially been exposed. And so you need to go back to the OSHA considerations and look at, like I said, determine what the sources are so you can see what employees and customers have been in those around those sources for the virus in your workplace. The second consideration that the CDC gives is maintaining healthy business operations. So what does this mean? It could mean many things for your business. You could have a workforce reentry strategy where you do different things right now. You could stagger shifts. Instead of everyone coming in from 9 to 5, you could stagger your shifts out potentially so that there are less people within the workplace at any specific time. You could also implement social distancing guidelines if possible. Change in overall, business practices, kind of like Dr. Baird was talking about Cura is doing. Cura is going into workplaces and doing temperature checks for their corporate clients. I know that my corporate clients, I've been advising them recently about implementing such strategies, especially the larger the workplace. And quite frankly, even the smaller workplaces, you could pose just as big, if not a bigger risk. So the third consideration that the CDC gives is how to maintain a healthy work environment. So we have maintaining the healthy operations, reducing the risk of transmission. How do we do that? So how do you maintain the actual environment? So there are many considerations, and I know that Mr. Wallace can get more into the details of that. But in terms of, you need to build an environment that supports proper hygiene and etiquette. That would be placing up potentially, signs and posters about the proper CDC guidelines for washing hands, the proper ways for the recommendation for coughing and sneezing. And it sounds, different, but we're actually having to change these types of routines now. This could be, as Dr. Baird discussed, disinfecting the areas regularly, having teams come in to do this. You need to advise traveling employees to take proper precautions. I actually just worked with one of my corporate clients about developing a protocol and guidelines for their employees who have to travel for work, and how what they need to do to remain safe and as they're traveling to high-risk areas to work, and that might have this infection. So with that being said, I will turn it back over to Steve.
Thanks, Alisa. Quick question. You're writing you've been a law review editor. You're writing a major paper on this. When will that be published on our website?
Well, I plan to have that done by next week. So hopefully really quick within the next week or two. Okay.
That just so the ladies and gentlemen understand, this thing changes so fast that Alisa spends 2 hours a day just updating what she's already got, plus writing the other material. But it'll probably be before we can, the fall of this year, before it goes into a law review status with one of the law schools.
Absolutely. And this is, what I've written, it's probably going to be over 100 pages. This is a complete and thorough breakdown of every area involving COVID in the workplace, potential claims, how to mitigate exposure, how to defend yourself against COVID-19 claims by employees, third parties, customers. So it does change rapidly, and we are keeping up with all the changes. And so it's going to be the most up-to-date and detailed guide available.
Thank you, Alisa. Everybody should get a copy. If you're interested in it, you're going to love it. If you're not interested in it, it's really good to put you to sleep at night.
It might be.
It's laden with lots of good information in there. Thanks, Alisa.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Our next presenter is Robert Wallace. Robert, we finally got to you. You okay?
Absolutely.
Are you at work?
I am. I'm one of those essential employees. We actually never stopped. So.
Well, Robert, it's good to have you. Robert is his expertise is health, safety, and environmental. He's been doing that for 15 years, and he's done it in Canada, done it in all over the United States, of course, and in Mexico. Robert is an interesting guy to talk to. His forte is talking to manufacturing people on the floor, and I love to listen to him, and you're going to understand in his presentation that that's where he comes from. All right, yep. Robert, take it away.
Great, absolutely. In speaking with Clint, Alisa, over this last little bit, we have gotten a lot of information, right? We've been told, CDC guidelines, Osha guidelines, and really the application of those things is very simple. We've been dealing with this COVID pandemic for approximately 2 months now. However, the tools that we're using to address the risk and reduce the risk in the workforce are tools that we've been using since the 70s, since OSHA guidance came out. Now, Alisa has actually spoken in regards to those guidelines. There was a guidance document that came out on the 16th, and in that document, if you'll see, OSHA talked about being able to comply with recurring audits, reviews, training, assessments, the things that we're supposed to be doing. The things that we're supposed to be doing in the workforce on a day-to-day basis. They've actually said, that the employer has to make a good faith attempt to comply with the OSHA guidelines that they have. But where an employer cannot demonstrate any effort to comply with, or why trying to comply with, or more hazardous situation, a citation may be appropriate. So in having said that, we're looking at this guidance, we need to be very not just worried about what can happen from a litigation standpoint, because we have obviously civil charges, but with OSHA, they can even come after you from a compliance standpoint. So you could find civil liability as well. When working with controls, Alisa mentioned very many from the CDC that we talked about, but when working on controls, some of the things that are most visible are actually the least effective in protecting your employees. Personal protective equipment, as that example that Dr. Baird gave, was the employee, cross-contaminating using the phone. It's all based on behavior, and each employee that uses personal protective equipment, their behavior is different, and it lacks. So the most important things that we can do actually is work this hierarchy of controls with being the most effective, to be starting at the top of this as just eliminating the hazard. And so when Alisa talked about the where, the how, the what, there are some tools in the industry that we can use that are very familiar to people who are into lean manufacturing or into safety, compliance, and health, or those type of things. One of the things that we use, one of the tools that we use would be a spaghetti diagram. A spaghetti diagram is simply more or less a layout of your facility. It's the places, it's the layout of your equipment, it's the layout of your desks, and how people flow to and from those areas, where those lines come into contact. So I'm looking at my employees, I'm looking at my visitors, I'm looking at contractors that come into my site, and I'm simply drawing a line with a different colored marker along that path and seeing where the majority of these items come into contact. And when we're identifying risk, we want to quantify risk, right? You guys want to see a value proposition for the money and the time that you spend into this, that they're going to actually improve and reduce the amount of risk that we're seeing. So the things that we do to measure risk, it's, if you can imagine, actually you don't have to imagine, I have it here on a slide, but the probability. So probability, another way to put that would be frequency. So if you've got 7,000 touches on a card reader, or say, for instance, your most frequently touched item in the plant would be probably your badge, where people are badging in or out. The frequency is very high, and the probability of contamination with frequency increases. The severity, obviously, Dr. Baird spoke about, but we need to go back and kind of identify how to quantify these things, because the way that we rank risk is what we want to work on first. Within the industry, there are things and tools that can be used either with your own health, safety, and environmental people, if you have that resource at your plant or at your location, or if you're, say, for instance, in the insurance industry with a smaller site, you might not have that capability or understanding. That's when you would want to reach out to somebody and identify those risks. So we talked about elimination. That's simply removing the hazard. So working from home, working away, not coming into contact with people where that is available. Substitution, it's something that Dr. Baird spoke about in the last time I spoke with him, that I didn't really get into as much here. But substitution would be, for instance, being able to pick people that had immunization, that had the pathogens already through their system, and had the antibodies and the antibody testing, putting them all on one line so that they could all then work, and they had antibodies in their system, and they wouldn't be cross-contaminating each other, and substituting them from different people within your facility. Where we really work in the health, safety, and environmental side is engineering controls. So these are things like high efficiency air filters, increasing ventilation rates and air turnover in the work environment, installing the physical barriers that you're going to see in between workstations. They're things that don't depend on the employee to actually effectively have in place. They're simply things that are allowing you to isolate people from the hazard. Moving down, you go into administrative controls. So those are going to be the things that you're really wanting to do when you move in and start your people coming back in the door. You're wanting to do training sessions. You want those documented. Every every document that you can put out there, if it comes to litigation, that you did your due diligence, you acted responsibly. Those things that you want them in place. You want documented screening protocols as you come back for these employees. Screening protocols for for antibodies, screening protocols for temperature, screening protocols at least for questionnaires, if that's not a applicable item for your facility. So ranking these in a cost and time to implement evaluation is important. And when you generate these documents, when you're looking at this risk, when you're quantifying this risk, you are in essence identifying these things. And anything that you write down, any plan that you put out, that's all discoverable. So what you want to do is you want to implement things that are going to be in place when you generate these things. Obviously, you want to either copy internal counsel and label it as prepared for internal counsel or privileged and confidential. Obviously, Holden can help you with some of those things as well. But as you prepare these documents, these are things that can be discovered, that can come out. We want to make sure that we're responsibly working down that priority system, that we have some logic for why we did what we did, what we're doing. And so we're using those tools to evaluate our risk proposition throughout the system. So as you move down into those administrative controls, you're talking about things like signage. You're talking about the training. You're talking about those screening protocols. And then we move down into one of the things that's the least effective, but really from a standpoint of a worker. We had a scare here at my facility. We've had actually a positive case for a family member of one employee who's been now quarantined for the 14-day period that we had established. We also had a possible positive that was actually a case that came back as was not confirmed COVID, but was submitted to the hospital with ventilation. And like Dr. Baird said, like Steve has said, I mean, these are men. These are manly men who work hard. They work hard. They drive big pieces of equipment, and the look of concern in their face when we had that positive test. I mean, these are very serious things that people are concerned about, and we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, that we're acting appropriately, that we don't open ourselves up to any sort of tort, any litigation. You know, with OSHA, with even the jury, you know, we have a geographic presumption. If somebody hurts their shoulder, well, they could have hurt it sleeping, but we have a presumption that it's something that happened at the workplace that was causing this. And so that's really what we're protecting ourselves against. We're wanting to show that we are responsibly working to address the risk within the workforce and give those people a sense of confidence, and providing the personal protective equipment and those things that you have. You know, these are long lead time items. Supplies like masks and thermometers, even setting up a cleaner. If you don't have necessarily set up a cleaning service that is appropriate, that can use those disinfectants that Dr. Baird spoke about, if they haven't been in to see your facility, it can cause delays once you've reopened if you have a positive case and have to shut down a line to bring in a Jana-King or a Serve Pro or any of these outfits. You want to make sure that you've identified who those vendors are, that they're in your system, that you can easily cut a PO, that they know what your site looks like, how to respond, and how to come out and resolve the issue so that you can get back to work. Because everybody, you know, cash flows are limited. People are being laid off. We want to make sure there's a value proposition in everything that we do, so that your employees, they want their jobs. They want them to they want you to succeed, right? So once again, you know, it's the balance of the risk that we're always working through in any industry that you come into. If you have any any questions? That's about all I had time to go through today, Steve.
that was excellent, Robert. There was a quick question that we had come in I want to ask you about. So we finished that section. How do we, this is from the corporation, how do we conduct employee visitor screening?
Yeah, so one of the things that you'll do specifically is a questionnaire. The questionnaire typically will include, the CDC guidelines for screening. They're looking for, have you had a temperature? In ours, we're looking for anybody that's had a temperature over 100.4 in the last 24 hours, 48 hours. We don't allow them to come into work. We really become flexible on whether, identifying something is COVID or not. A lot of these facilities will have point systems where people are pointing out if they don't come into work, and those we really need to show a lot of flexibility to, so we don't open ourselves up to litigation in regards to employment litigation, like the EEOC stuff that you guys are, I'm sure would be able to help them with.
Thank you, Robert. While we're getting into questions, there was a question for Dr. Baird. An employee provided a history of a family member with diarrhea and fever in their 2-year-old at home. What should the employer do when they come to work?
So Steve, those are symptoms consistent with potential infection. They could be related to COVID-19, and therefore they should be considered as a positive contact. And that employee should stay at home for at least the 72 hours of no symptoms, or until testing confirms that is a negative case.
Okay, and didn't want to necessarily go into a panel deal, but in spinning off of that to Alisa, do you tell, and this is part of the question, do you tell the rest of the employees someone has a possible, Robert says no damn way, but here this person could have been infectious for the last 4 days and has been there and gone, then there and gone. What about the employee that is sitting there and they've got an elderly parent at home they're taking care of? What do you do?
So is the question, do you inform the other employees that someone's infected, or is it?
No, here it's just a possibility of infection, but
okay.
It sounds too close to ignore.
Right. So
I would want to know if I sat next to him in the office, I would want to know that, but.
Right. So in terms of mitigating your liability legally, you do want to inform your work staff if they have even potentially been exposed to the virus. So if someone is showing symptoms, but they have not had a positive test for COVID, there's been no confirmation of COVID, you still have to warn them, and you want to treat it as if the person does in fact have COVID. So they want to take all the same precautions. You want to take all the same screening. Along those lines, you need to be very careful. The EEOC and the American Disabilities Act both have blurred the lines a little bit in order to allow employers to ask more personal medical questions of their employees. However, you cannot reveal the identities of the employees or that personal information to your work staff. So you could tell them, you have been potentially exposed to COVID-19. You need to act in the ways if you have, but you cannot tell them who exposed them to COVID-19 in the workplace.
Yeah, I'm grinning, and I shouldn't, because that creates a whole different ball of problems in the workforce. Just think you tell your workforce, I can't tell you who has it, but someone's had it, so govern yourself accordingly. Well, then a water cooler, and hopefully 6 feet apart, they're all saying, well, who do you think it is? I think it was Billy Bob. He's not here today. I mean, it runs rampant, and I know we don't have solutions for that today. I guess it points up what a tangled web this all is. And I know, Robert, what did you think?
Well, I just simply see a difference between a family member with potential, your risk of that is considerably lower, I would believe, to actually having an employee that is there on site that has had that contamination, and is exemplifying that they might have been exposed, versus a family member or a 2-year-old. You're going to put a lot of worry into your workforce.
Yeah.
And you can't even really say whether or not it could be teething, and everybody thinks that they've got COVID.
This is an excellent point about what our presentation is about. When that employee comes in that day, it's going to depend on what the problems were at home, how deep they are. What if it was a confirmed case? HR is going to need to know what to do. So that's why I tell everybody, you're going to have to get your team in place, because you need to be able to call your lawyer immediately and say, hey, Peggy Sue's standing here. What do I do? I don't want to get sued by her for, sending her home. I don't want to get sued by the person she sits by.
Yeah, we've educated our employees that if anybody is just exhibiting symptoms at home, that could be that we're putting them out, that they're not coming in for that 14-day period.
Let me go to the last question, and I'll sign off, and I'll handle this one. What are the chances of being sued if an employee contracts COVID-19 at work? Sued in the form of, like, if it's workers' compensation, that's about 100%. Luckily, your workers' compensation is going to limit your folks' liability, and as long as it is a workplace deal and you've tried reasonably well to take care of your workforce, that is going to be contained. We're talking containment of litigation now. The big danger is someone contracts it at work, goes home, gives it to their wife, and she dies, and her parents die because she went to visit her parents, and they trace it back to your place. That is where the reptilian plaintiff attorney comes in, sues you, claiming you did not have a safe workplace. I don't want to get off into it too deep, but that's why I'm upset that the CDC was not allowed to give more firm guidelines. If we have firm guidelines, at least we can show we're doing them.
Absolutely. The stronger the reentry workforce strategy, the stronger your defense against these types of claims.
Correct. It just, again, shows how tangled this is. Those verdicts getting outside the workplace, they get into millions. And then you start hearing, the jury starts hearing, that little temperature tester that Dr. Baird talked about, that cost $5. And they didn't even spend the $5 to take care of it. Well, those SOBs, trust me, I've heard it all before, I'll hear it again. I think we have one last question. JJ, go ahead and ask it. That question didn't pop up, it just popped in. Okay, they want to know, when will I shut up? No, just kidding. It didn't come through, folks, and we have been past our time. If you need a bootleg copy of that CDC guidelines that weren't supposed to see the light of day, I've got it. Let me know. It really appears to be copied on a handheld black and white copier to get it out there. Someone asked in the questions, is this available for webcast, because they need to take it back to their workforce to show them. Yes, it is. It'll stay up on the website. In the future, we'll have an OSHA expert. We'll have actually going to have an insurance broker because you've got to make sure you're covered. Your directors and officers liability coverage, be real careful with it. Your CGL coverage, because what it's talking about if someone gets sick that isn't an employee, but an employee takes it out to them. You've got to have that stuff all in place and make sure it's there, because it's going to happen. There's going to be suits. We've also got a cleaning group that we want you to talk to, because when you need them, you needed them like 5 minutes ago. It's not something you can start calling around when trouble happens. And that's really the way with all of this, folks. If I had to leave it with one thing, is you've got to be prepared to move, to make calls instantaneously, because decisions have to be made to help protect in the lawsuit. The other thing, the last thing that everybody has an interest in, we're partnering with a jury consultant, because we're wanting to look at what jurors are going to be motivated by in this outbreak, how they react to what companies do, where do companies meet that line that the jury goes, okay, they did their best, and where they didn't. It's going to be very interesting. After 2008, I did the same thing, and that's when the atmosphere of the jury turned more anti-corporate. Is that going to happen this time? I don't know, because everybody knows this virus is not something that the corporations created. But I can tell you this, if the jury thinks that the corporation took care of profits over taking care of their people, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt bad. We're going to, I tell you what, we're going to keep the system on for 5 minutes, because I know a lot of people have been listening, and thank you for that. That might want to enter a question. So go ahead and enter those, and also you can send them to, we've got a COVID address on the website. You know what my address, I'd say 50, 60% of the people on this chain who are watching already have my address. So if you need anything, you know where to reach us. And I really, really want to thank Dr. Baird. I really, really want to thank Robert Wallace. We've had some great discussions in preparing for this and in taking care of clients. Very fascinating stuff. And of course, Alisa, she's our fearless leader on all things COVID, and we appreciate it, Alisa.
No problem. And I would like to say that if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about, developing their own plan of action for reentering the workplace, feel free to contact me. I'm more than willing to discuss it with you.
Yeah, we have to tell her to hang up occasionally, because she will sit and talk for hours on COVID. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna bug out of here. Give you 5 minutes to put anything up. We went a little bit long, which we apologize for, but to us this is incredibly important, and we wanted to get it to you. Thanks for attending. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.